Hello, hi. It's Henry the computer guy, and you're welcome to our lesson number 34. And in today's lesson, we're actually going to be looking at the storage computer hardware. What do these ones actually help us to do? They help us to store or keep or retain our information or data such that we can use it, for example, anytime that we feel we want. So they are telling us that these are components or hardware components that are used to store or retain information. You have anything or any data that you want to keep, so you need what we call a storage computer hardware. So it can be temporarily or it can be permanent. That means that some of them can store data for a short period of time, while others can store data for a longer period of time. For example, if you have what we call the RAM or the random access memory, this one is volatile and it keeps data for a short period of time. So whenever power is switched off, its contents are going to be erased or lost. So that one stores for a short period of time or temporarily. Then when we come to the permanent, these ones retain data for a longer period of time. For example, if you have a hard disk, you have your computer, you keep your information there, your content there, your music there. So that data is going to be retained even if you switch off the computer. Because remember, it is non-volatile. So it will retain the data even if power is switched off. Let's look at some of the examples of some of them. So we have the compact disk and it has a storage capacity of 700 MBs. Then we have a digital versatile disk or digital video disk that has a storage capacity of 4.7 GB. So for many of you go watch movies, so all the movies at times they are put on a DVD because it has a bigger storage capacity compared to a CD. Then we have the Blu-ray disc, which is the BD disc, and if it is a single layer, has a storage capacity of 25, and if it is double, it has a storage capacity of 50 GB. We have memory cards. Many of you have phones and you put memory cards there. They can be of 1 GB, 2 GB, and so on. So they can go on ranging. Then we can have the flash disks. You also have flash disks where you keep your music, and these ones also range in storage capacities. For example, you can get a 2 GB, you can get a 4 GB, 8 GB, and others. We have pen disks. These ones are somehow similar to the flash disks, and they're also used to store some content like a flash disks. We have the floppy disk, and this one specifically has 1.44 MBs, no longer in use recently because of its storage capacity, which is less. Remember, some of the contents and nowadays some of the songs can even reach up to start from 203 MBs. So when you get a floppy disk, it cannot even have one or store one of that song. So they were actually used in older days to store some documents, because remember, some of the documents are always in KBs and they are very of a low storage space. So we shall be looking at these KBs or MBs I'm actually talking about with time to come. So we have the zip disk, which also has a storage capacity of 750 MBs. Then we have the jazz disk, which can have 1 and 2 OGBs. Then we can have the hard disk, the one that I'm having in my computer. All your computers are having hard disks, but they also range in sizes. You can get one on 120 GB, up to terabyte. They can even range up to the zettabyte or yottabyte and others, as we shall look at them in the next lessons. So even their sizes go on ranging. They are not always static. So, having talked about some of the examples of storage computer hardware, we can also look at the categories where we can put them. So, categories of storage media. And they're telling us that there is a wide variety of storage devices in the following categories. Remember, we have seen the examples, but where do they actually fall? So, first of all, we can talk about the magnetic media. And the magnetic storage media represents data in a magnetic spot on a tape or disk, with a magnetized spot representing a 1 bit and the absence representing a what? A 0 bit. So whenever we have, let's say, a presence of a bit, that represents a 1. And whenever there is absence, that represents a what? A 0. And we have some of the examples of this, whereby we can have the magnetic tapes. We are going to be looking at the diagrams. We have the floppy disks. Then we have the zipper and the jazz disks. We can also have the hard disk. So those are termed as the magnetic media. So whenever they tell you, for example, give examples of, let's say, optical media, magnetic media, you don't supposed to give every component that we have as storage. They can also be categorized as we are saying them now. Then we have the optical media. And they're telling us that optical storage refers to recording of data by making marks in a pattern that can be read back within the aid of a light, usually a beam of laser light. So these are specifically the ones we call optical, and optical comes from light or optics. So that means that we have some of the examples where we have the CDs, the DVDs, the Blu-ray discs, and other magneto-optical discs. Remember, the magneto-optical have combined the features of the magnetic and the optical. So these ones have two combined features of magnetic and optical. Then we can talk about the solid state storage. And the solid state storage devices have got no moving parts, and data is stored and retrieved from them in a similar way as it would be from computer memory. So these ones store data, but they actually have no moving part. So you can never hear them making some of those noise, like for example the magnetic, for example the hard disk. It makes some little noise, but these ones have no moving parts, so they can never make any noise, but they can store data as if it was like from memory. For example, we have the flash disks. We can have the USB memory sticks. We have the memory cards, the smart cards, for example, the credit cards. We can have the micro SD cards. So SD specifically in full is the secure digital. We can have a SIM card. Remember, you have phones and they store some of the information, for example, phone numbers, but they have no moving parts. You also wonder how that SIM card can store some data. So it is under solid state. So the SIM card in full is actually the subscriber identity module. So now let's continue and look at some of the diagrams. And this is the one we have as the hard disk. Actually, we can have it as external or internal. Remember, we talked about the user manual some time back, and we saw that we can connect an external disk using what we call the case or the enclosure. So when you can be having it as internal, then by what we call the enclosure, you put it there, then it will become an external hard disk. Then we can have the flash disks. I've already said that these ones range in sizes and retain data. We can have the floppy disks, as those ones we saw their storage capacities. We can have the memory cards, and we also say that these ones go on ranging. We said we have the zip disks. We can have the compact disks or the DVDs. They are always in this format, but the storage capacity goes on ranging from, for example, the CD and the DVD, the Blu-ray, they go on ranging. We have the magnetic tapes, and I know some of you have not seen this before, but some of you have used them before, or you have seen them. So those are the tapes that we always use. They are called the magnetic tapes, and we have what we call the jazz disks. Let's continue. Some of them are also there. For example, here we have the hard disk. Can have the random access memory, and we say that this one retains data for a short period of time, so it is volatile. So we have the read-only memory. This is non-volatile. It retains data permanently. For example, the firmware, and it is always installed there when they are manufacturing the component or the device. That's why it is non-volatile. Its content are always retained even if power goes off. So we can have the CD or DVD, we can have the floppy, the memory card, the pen drive, then the tape, or the ones we call the magnetic tapes. That's how some of them also look like. I think you have ever seen some of them here. We continue and look at the processing computer hardware. Remember, we said that Whenever we enter data into our computer, we have to process it. That processing is the one that makes our data to become information. And they're telling us that basically processing hardware is the central processing unit. The CPU is the one that actually converts our data to something that has a meaning. They're telling us that the CPU processes data according to our instructions, and it is the brain of the computer. Whenever you enter data into a computer, it will process it depending on how you tell it to do it. When a computer receives data from an input device, for example, a mouse and a keyboard, the data must be processed before it can go to an output device, such as a printer or a monitor. So when you enter data, it has to work upon it. It is being worked upon, for example, by the CPU. Then it will go to the output device. Then you are able to see it. Then they are telling us that processing is a procedure that transforms the raw data into meaningful information. Therefore, a processing device is responsible for converting data into useful information. So whenever you hear someone saying that I'm processing my data, so they are converting that data to become something that has a meaning. And this is how it looks like. For example, we have our input device, and that is a microphone. So when we enter our data into a computer, it will go to what we call the processing device. That is the central processing unit. It will process it, or manufacture it, or change it into something that someone wants. Then it will come out on an output. Let's say it can be an output device or the storage device. Then it can come back as, let's say, something with a meaning. So specifically, processing is converting data to something that has meaning, which is the information. We continue. And other examples can also include, we can have the motherboard, which is the main circuit board where all components in the system unit are connected. So it is also helping us to process the data. We can also have the network card or the network interface card. And remember, we said if you want to connect to any network, it will be the network interface card to help you connect to a network. Then we have the graphics processing unit, and this is specifically a specialized processor or chip capable of rendering graphics for display on an electronic device. So those are the graphics that you always see on your monitor. They are supposed to be processed by what we call the graphics processing unit, such that you see them onto your monitors. And this is how a motherboard looks like. Into the system unit, that's the body that we are having there, where we always connect everything in our system unit. And this is what we call the network card. You connect that, we call the network or the Ethernet cable there, such that you can connect to a network. Then we can have the graphics processing unit. Actually, it's where we can always plug our HDMI cable, which is the high definition multimedia interface. You have a TV, you want to connect your computer to let's say, the TV, and at times the decoders they make today have what we call the HDMI. You connect your HDMI cable to the decoder, then to your TV. Then we have what we call the VGA, which is the video graphics array. You have your computer, your monitor, you want to connect it to the system unit, it will be connected to this also. Or you can have what we call the DVI, which is the digital video or visual interface. All those ones can help us to connect our monitors. We continue. And they're showing us that, for example, here we can have the CPU. It can be dual core, I-core, and others. They go on ranging. Then we can have our random access memory. This is how it looks like down here. This is our hard disk. This is our motherboard. This is our power supply. And this is our fan that we are having. So all those components are found inside the system unit. We continue. And they're telling us that we also have components inside the system unit, other components that we have not talked about here. For example, we can have the power supply, motherboard, the processor or the CPU, RAM, optical drives, hard disks, heatsink, and others. They are also there, as we shall see them with time to come in practical. We continue. Then we have the back of the 60-minute. Let's talk about the back of the 60-minute a little. So on the back of the 60-minute, we have some outlets there, or ports. And we say that a port is actually a point at which a peripheral connects to the computer or 60-minute. So you have ever seen this at the back of your computer. And these are the two, for example, at times they are not put there because they are old. They are called the PS2 ports, and they can help us to connect to the keyboard and the mouse. Then we can have what we call the power, or the main power. It's where you get your power cable, connect it, then you connect to the main switch. Then we have those ones for the USB, which is the universal serial bus. You want to connect your USB cable to your computer, you look for this. They can be ranging, let's say 2 to 3, 4, and others. Then we can have what we call the sound output. This one helps us to give sound. We want to connect your speakers there. Then it can. Then we want to enter sound into our computer. There is the sound in. We want to connect our microphone. Is what we call the microphone there. Then we have what we call the MIDI organ port, the musical instrument digital interface port. Then we can also talk about this video card, the network card also there, the modem card, the modem port also there. We continue. Let's talk about the communication computer hardware. Communication computer hardware are specifically these computer hardware that help 2 or more computers to communicate. For example, in a room, you can network your computers and they communicate. But what are some of those devices we can use? So they're telling us that these are computer hardware that enable 2 or more computers to communicate. And we can have some of the examples. For example, we can have a modem. In full, modem is modulation, demodulator, changing from either analog to digital or digital to analog. You can have the cables for network cables or the Ethernet cables. We can have the network card, the routers, the switches, the hubs, and others. Let's look at them in diagrams. And this is what we call a network cable. For example, you have 2 or more computers, or you have 2 computers actually. You want them to communicate, or you want to transfer data to one or another computer, but you don't have a flash disk. You can use a cable and transfer data from one computer to another. We can have what we call a hub. A hub is like it is actually cheap and can replicate data on all interfaces. So it can help us to connect a bunch of computers together. You have more than 2 computers, you can connect them using a hub. But actually, it has a problem of actually causing unnecessary traffic on our network. So they are not the best ones to use. Then we also have what we call a switch. A switch is actually the hub's master brother. It avails more hosts on a network, but far better than the hub. Remember, it has what we call a switch table, which can learn where all computers are on a network using what we call the MAC address. So for it, it will not be able to duplicate or replicate our data on all the computers on a network. So it is somehow more secure compared to a hub. Then we have what we call a router, and this one specifically connects computers between networks. So if you want to connect a computer in another network, you can use what we call a router. It will find the best and shortest possible route to a different network. So it's been Henry the Computer Guy. Thank you for watching. If you're new to my channel, please help me to share the link and also subscribe. Bye bye. See you in the next video. I sign out.